Welcome to Solved. We make this show because if we don't tell you how to think, someone dumber on the internet will. My name is Jay, and our other resident solvers are Amanda, Deon, and Erin, who will offer a greeting now.
Hey there.
Hello.
How's it going?
Now, these days, the Democratic Party is doing some major navel-gazing, trying to figure out how in the world they ushered in an era of fascism in the shape of the most buffoonish politician we've seen in at least 100 years. We have some thoughts and suggestions for them, and the big news is that there are signs that they're more ready than at any time in my lifetime to receive those suggestions. So that is very exciting. So New York Magazine wrote the article, "Why are AOC and Bernie so much better at this?" And I have to read this because it made me laugh. The opening paragraph says, "Last month, as Elon Musk's malevolent influence on Donald Trump's second term was coming into focus, my friend DM'd me a clip of Chuck Schumer leading a protest against Musk's efforts to access sensitive Treasury Department data. 'We will win,' croaked the Senate Minority Leader, the crowd clearly reluctant to join this confused approximation of what impassioned resistance might look like. My friend wrote, 'We're all gonna die.'" And that does kind of sum up the Democratic resistance so far. Maybe it's improved ever so slightly since then, but the article then points out that this is not like the left wing of the Democratic Party is frustrated with the Democrats. Everyone is. So they pointed to an article from MSNBC that says, according to a Quinnipiac poll of more than 1,000 registered voters conducted between February 13th and February 17th, just 21% of voters approve of the job congressional Democrats are doing, while 68% disapprove. That is not a coincidence. That is not, oh, well, the far left is never satisfied. They are clearly going in the wrong direction. Meanwhile, Bernie and AOC the article describes their critiques as precise and cathartic. And then they're like going around the Midwest setting rallies on fire. So, in a good way.
In a good way.
Yeah. So it sort of poses the question, that's the point of the article, like, why is this? Why is there this difference? And in essence, it's because people like Bernie and AOC are just as disappointed in Democrats as the rest of us. And then some of the Democrats are flummoxed as to how they're not more popular because they probably think they're doing a great job or something.
So just going back real quick to Chuck Schumer chanting, "We will win, we will win." So I happened to watch that live on a YouTube stream and the cringe was deep. But I think actually what was important about that rally was that it started with that kind of crap and then it ended with Ezra Levin from Indivisible coming out and calling out Chuck Schumer like at the same rally. And he was like, "I love a good chant, but that's not enough right now. Do something." And got the crowd chanting, "Do something." And I was like, this is the bookend of the times we are in right now. There's the old guard and there's the new energy to fight and actually do something that will be effective. And it was a nice little nugget of where we are right now.
I hate to give anyone credit on the dumb left, but there were a couple people who did say that the upside of Trump winning would be something like this. And I don't know if, this is worth it, that we have to go through whatever we're going through with the Trump administration for the Democratic Party at large to realize that something's wrong. But the Democratic Party at large is realizing something is wrong and we need to go forward and change some things. May not have happened if Harris had won. It seems like, I'm not going to compare Harris to Trump, but Trump didn't win 50% of the vote, barely won by a small percentage of the popular vote, and is saying they have an all-time mandate from on high. So politicians do that. They win, and they're not going to say what went wrong. They're going to say, this is what went right. And this wouldn't have happened now. I think it would have happened eventually because the Democratic Party has needed to change for a long time. And I think Democratic voters have been frustrated for quite some time. So eventually this was going to happen. I'm glad it is happening, but I wish we didn't have to go through Trump in order for this to happen.
Right.
And
At a great cost.
And I mean, you took my point because I was going to praise what you said last week, Deon, that if it hadn't happened this term and Harris had been in now, we would have delayed the inevitable. And this would have ended up happening eventually. We've been holding out hope for decades that the Democratic Party could make a turn without having to face absolute disaster first. And I don't mean disaster for the party, I mean disaster for the country. And it turns out, no. I mean, I think our hopes were more moral than the accelerationists on the dum-dum left who wanted to court disaster in the hopes of initiating this turn. But just because they weren't wrong that if we face ultimate disaster, that might actually shake the party, doesn't mean that we should have been hoping for it.
Right.
That's the difference. But yeah, we all sort of knew that this is where we were heading.
And of course, we don't know if we're going to pull out of this anytime soon.
Right.
And that is the big factor that the dum-dum left does not like to talk about. They just think, oh yeah, everyone will get angry and we'll win. Okay.
We will win. It's the it's the Chuck Schumer, like, we will win.
Yeah.
If bad things happen, not necessarily, but it does seem like there's a lot of momentum for us to change, and that's hopeful.
Look at
like
you.
50-50. Because then, unfortunately, like, there's good examples of seeing movement and change, and I want to hold on to those and give those weight. But I also feel like name of like who they think are popular, like in the politician realm, like we're still looking at like a Gavin Newsom who has completely
He should be
gone off the
disqualified right away.
Yeah. And, like he thinks the answer of running for president is to, one, go into private industry, and two, come up with a podcast where you're bringing right-wing people over to like bash trans people and abandon a lot of your core constituents. Like, I don't know. I see plenty of examples that leave me with this 50-50. Like, the Democratic Party might adapt, or we might have to abandon them and move on and, wait this out even longer, because that's what it would result in. If we have to go third party, it's going to take even longer. So I am all for pushing Democrats along with us, but again, 50-50 shot.
Let me put you to 51%. Gavin Newsom's polling has tanked since the podcast, so it is not the right message for Democrats. Which, of course, it's not. Why would it have been the right message?
Yeah.
I think that's the doubt, right? That we continuously watch them go with the wrong answer, like recognizing the problem and then coming up with a very shitty solution that leaves us in a circle.
So I think that the evidence, which we're going to get to even more of it, is clear that a pivot is happening. It's going to be slow. I mean, slower than we want for it to be. It's going to be messy. There are going to be foot draggers, but it is happening. In that context, I do want to complain about a piece of this article. Like, most of it was totally fine, but there's this line that poked at me a little bit. It says, Sanders' diagnosis that the party was undone in 2024 because it abandoned the working class lines up with analyses that have been offered up by gloating MAGA Republicans and disillusioned anti-woke liberals alike. End quote. And that comparison, that framing, I just think that journalists and commentators spread this false division in the left because they probably don't actually understand it. We on this show, I would consider us plenty woke, but we have also been pro Bernie Sanders since like 2005 when he started running for Senate. And I heard him on Al Franken's show on the actual terrestrial radio and was like, oh, that guy's a badass. I really like him. I hope he ends up at the Senate. And so, like, trying to divide this, there's the woke left and then there's the economic populist left, as though those are necessarily separate things. Like there's a Venn diagram, but there is so much overlap between those. I mean, the Black Lives Matter organization were very explicitly Marxist. And that was one of the criticisms that the right had about them. If that's not the combination of woke identity politics and populist economic politics, I don't know what is. And so when people speak about the far left, they are exclusively, but wrongly, talking about gender politics, language policing, and whatever anyone else wants to put under the umbrella of wokeness. And they never mean Bernie Sanders style democratic socialism with a focus on economics for the people and against the billionaires. So for those who are ignorant, which like maybe the writer of this article just like doesn't quite know the dynamics, there are those who are ignorant, but for others, a lot of people are actually cynical about this because they realize that they can use the social and the identity politics, which admittedly don't poll as well, to define the far left in its entirety as a way of getting people to look away from the economic policies of the far left, which are extremely popular and shared by the vast majority of those people who are also concerned about social dynamics and gender and people's civil rights and all of that stuff that unfortunately doesn't poll as well.
That was something that popped out at me in this article and a couple others that we're not going to talk about, but that we read going into the show, is that the use of the word working class, and it happens in media writ large, is interchangeable with lower middle class white people. That's what is being said, or that's what I'm hearing, and maybe it's just what I'm hearing, but the way it's said over and over again and contrasted with woke, like, who do you
Yep.
think those people are that are supposedly woke? Are they rich? Are they not working? They are all probably working class. What does working class even mean now? And I think there's this picture of white guy who used to work at a factory in Ohio and now is a Republican voter because he's mad because he's not making as much money or whatever. But not trans people have jobs, black people have jobs, women have jobs. They are working class people. Using that as like a division is very frustrating. And I doubt the article writer meant that or is even trying to imply that, but that's my takeaway. And it's another divider because working class is a very broad descriptor, but it's not being used as broadly as I think it should be.
Yeah. That's clearly like working class and those who don't work, aka the poor, aka people we don't want to talk to. I mean, truly, that's what it is. It's always bothered me. I've always found it very like a derisive term, and yet it is the standard in our politics.
Yeah, and I think that also benefits like kind of what Jay was saying about the identity part, as if, again, trans people don't also have to work, need safe housing, need their children to be educated by a department that, does it exist? Does it not? Will it? Um, but one of my favorite pieces from an episode I just worked on articulated that we're in a day and age where it's being projected as if something has changed, and like they reference the LGBT movement from like the 1970s. And it's like trans people are asking for the same rights that they've been asking for. Nothing has evolved. Nothing has changed. But if you listen to commentary, you would assume, and I would say this about right and left, because of the narrative being offered by the right wing and not being countered as much on the left, they now have the language. They've made the argument. So it's really hard to counter that. And so you see a population that's completely abandoned when, again, what they're asking for is what a large subset of the population is asking for. They want to be able to work and work safely. Again, safe housing, education, like all of those are things that the working class in general wants. Why would it be separated? That doesn't even make sense. Unless you think that people are reduced down to their identities.
Which is the claim made about the left, as though that's how the left feels, but that's only the cartoonish version of the left that doesn't really exist, but like people like to imagine that we're not talking about economics at all. I mean, even the like the socialist left who hates talking about identity in any way because they think it distracts from transitioning to socialism, they also help perpetuate the cartoonish view of their fellow leftists who also care about identity and everything we've just been discussing, because everything is so intrinsically linked that it doesn't make sense to not include everything. But they help perpetuate the myth that if you're talking about race or identity or gender, then you're distracting from economics, or you don't believe in it, or you're wasting people's time or something like that. And so then all of this combined, I mean, the right does it cynically and the left does it accidentally. And meanwhile, centrists, like centrist Democrats, because there aren't any centrist Republicans for the most part, those people who like pretty much don't believe in economic populism, they are not on board with the Bernie Sanders style economic populism, and then are also afraid of having themselves be seen as tied to any of the social issues that they don't think polls well, results in them not standing for anything and giving people no reason to vote for them. It's not actually that big of a surprise that Democrats are getting wiped out these days when the Bernie Sanders left is standing for what they believe in and saying it very loudly, and everyone else is like, I don't know, I'm not sure what I believe in, but you should probably vote for us because fascism and democracy is better than fascism, which is not wrong, but it's not inspiring, and that is not how people process who they want to vote for. And so here we are.
I just want to say, first up, I am a proponent of good journalism. I love the media as a necessary part of our democracy, but I do have a lot of criticisms of them lately. And my first one here is that part of the reason the right gets to divide the left in woke and economic populism terms and basically define us for us is because the media does not talk about issues that are affecting lower income people, even middle income people. Really, they are only talking about, quote, the economy. And what they mean by that is, how is the S&P 500 doing? How is the Dow doing? That's what they're talking about. People who are invested, who have plenty of money and lots of protection against any sort of severe dip in markets. And all they care about is who's going to run for president. So those are the things they talk about. How's the economy doing? Who's going to run for president? How's the economy doing? Who's going to run for president? And later in this article, they mentioned Matt Iglesias, who had tweeted in response to AOC and Bernie's incredible turnout at their rallies around the country, saying, like, is he going to endorse someone? Is Bernie going to run in 2028? Like, in this breathless fervor. And AOC, to her amazing credit, responded, believe it or not, some people's everyday actions aren't motivated by some long-term career ambition, but out of a genuine love for people and a desire to do right by them. Mind blown, right? Like, holy shit. Can you imagine anyone not solely focused on their pure ego ambition to become the most powerful person in the universe? Like, Jesus Christ. Like, first of all, she's the best. She's just like so good at knocking all of that bullshit down. But what is wrong with pundits like Matt Iglesias? Like, they've been trained in the world of corporate American media. And the only question worth asking anyone, they feel, is whether or not they're running for president. Read the fucking room. Read the fucking room, Matt. Read the fucking room, Caitlin Collins. And the Times reporter who interviewed Bernie and asked the same stupid question. He knocked it down too perfectly. Like, read the damn room. People are not worried about that. They are worried about what is going to affect their freaking lives. Like, how is this so hard? People are sick and tired of politicians with personal ambitions. Like, that is out. That is out. It's like the meme at the end of the year that I will not be able to accurately describe. That is out. What is in is people actually caring and giving a damn about people's lives. So, like, this moment is a reaction to decades of that bullshit from corporate media who have framed this whole debate as only about people at the top. and the people on the bottom can get the fucking scraps. Like, we're done. So stop asking the old tired questions from an antiquated era.
And I just like can't help but think if either of them ended up running, it would be like, oh, that's what you're doing. Like it
Yeah.
has to be
Yeah.
like, not that, there was discussions. Obviously, they didn't have another candidate to put up. Like Bernie Sanders is not running to be like he is not eager, I should say, to be president. I don't see that from him. But I think no matter what, his actions would always be back to these moments of like, of course, that had to be part of the motive because for a lot of other politicians, it is their motive. That's
Yeah.
exactly why
Right.
they're out doing what they're doing. But it's refreshing. I think that's part of the reason why they're beloved in the way that they are is because they feel authentic. They don't read as if this is a career stepping stone.
So coming to more evidence of the shift in process, we have more comments from people who are wrong often, but they are providing evidence of the shift. So this is actually from Jacobin back in November, right? So after the election, and that's titled "Liberals Are Finally Admitting Bernie is Right." And so David Brooks, of all people, finally admitted that Bernie was right after the election. He just had to say it in like the squirmiest way possible so that he could pretend like Bernie was only right because of, democracy and everyone agreeing with him. But actually, David Brooks is still right in the broader sense. So he said, "So I'm a moderate who really did not like the policies that Bernie Sanders proposes. And yet the one thing he got right, Jesus Christ, the
Oh,
one
man.
thing he got right was disruption. Disrupt the system. I'm arguing against my own viewpoint here, but it could be in order to win working class votes in an era of high distrust. The Democrats have to do a lot of things that Bernie Sanders said they should do, and I certainly have several friends who were pro-Bernie and then became pro-Trump because they just wanted disruption. And so those two versions of populism, maybe it's time they fight each other," end quote. So, and I can't believe I get to use this, twice in two shows. It's just like the F- comic from last week. He's impressive in that he's able to change his mind without ever having been wrong. And then just because we like beating up on David Brooks, Jacobin says it this way, says, "It takes Brooks considerable throat clearing and hedging to admit what should be obvious. The Democratic Party has entrenched itself in an elite, insider, Rube Goldberg machine of incumbents, big donors, party officials, cozy pundits, cable news, and consultants. For years, talking heads have been chattering, temporizing, and reinforcing the status quo, while Democratic socialists have been fighting to get the goods for people, and in doing so, prevent the rise of Trump and his cohort." That's the divide. And the fact that Brooks is like starting to break is interesting. I have more though. James Carville, right after the election, he didn't go so far as to say that Bernie Sanders was right, but he at least said that he was wrong. That's positive. Much more recently, Senator Chris Murphy was on The Daily Show. I have a short clip of him being right while still being cringy.
We viewed people like Bernie as an outlier threat to the institutional Democratic Party, when in fact what he was talking about and is still talking about is the crossover message, right? Is the message that
it's
actually
the traditional
brings, right?
Democratic message.
That actually...
It's RFK Democrats.
And that pulls Trump voters back into the Democratic coalition.
So I heard that. Amanda brought it to my attention. And I was just like, I'm glad you're saying it now, but boy, does that not instill confidence that you're able to like read. How are you a senator? And you're like, you genuinely thought that Bernie Sanders was a threat to the Democratic Party when he was I mean, we've been paying attention to senators recently while they've been scrambling to figure out how to save the country, and not doing that great of a job. They very often mention their like love of history and their deep well of knowledge of history. Are these people like not familiar with FDR? Do they not know what the Democratic Party used to be? Like, of course they do. Of course they know that. And it's ridiculous to imagine that they could listen to Bernie Sanders and not recognize that he's just saying the same stuff that made the Democratic Party incredibly popular for several decades in the last century.
So I'm sure I disagree with Chris Murphy on a bunch of stuff. I am glad he's out there saying this, whether or not
Sure.
it's like purely genuine or like, whatever. I'm just glad it's being said because it will give more Democrats, I mean, sadly, like cover to come out and finally say these things too. I actually think he was talking about the party as a whole and not necessarily his personal views. It's very possible, and I think it's very true, that there are lots of Democrats who don't really like how things are going within their own party, but because of the institution and the power of the Democratic Party as an institution, they're not going to come out and speak out against their own party, especially at a time of intense division and with Republicans breathing down their neck, right? So that's not going to happen. But like, I feel like if Chris Murphy can adopt, let's call it adopt the diagnosis of the party and where it went wrong, which was seeing Bernie as a threat instead of the only guy with his finger on the pulse. Like, saying that does matter. Saying that loudly and publicly does matter. It's the beginning of creating a path for other Democrats to come into the fold and like start saying these things too. And that's apparently happening because Chris Deluzio from Pennsylvania has now started what he's calling the New Economic Patriots, which is going to be kind of a sub party within the Democratic Party that is focusing on an economic message. Now, whether or not they have success, whether or not they do it right, all of those things are still very, very questionable. But the fact that it's even starting to happen, that there are things being talked about like this, is actually a good sign. It's so frustrating. It's like incredibly frustrating that it hasn't been happening sooner. But the fact that it's happening at all is a good sign. And like, I need to try to personally calm my irritation with some of these very like politician-y politicians when they're actually laying some good groundwork here.
I entirely agree. I know it sounded like I was yelling at him, but I remember this is a positive show. This is uplifting and hopeful. That was part of the hopefulness. I'm showing the pivot in all of its agony, but it is happening, and that is the more important part. I do want to read this quote. It's gone around and around, and it's not part of the pivot. I just need to respond to it. I've heard many times in the last couple of months the old 2016 quote from Schumer, where he confidently declared, quote, "For every blue-collar Democrat we lose in Western Pennsylvania, we will pick up 2 moderate Republicans in the suburbs in Philadelphia, and you can repeat that in Ohio and Illinois and Wisconsin," end quote. To which I ask, what did he think would happen in a post-Trump Republican Party? I mean, this is back in 2016, but Trump was already like kind of old. He was either going to be defeated or, eventually he's going to die. And Schumer's plan for the Democrats was to get rid of Democratic voters and pick up Republican voters who were willing to vote for Democrats, maybe, he theorized, because Trump was so extreme. But in a post-Trump era, when Republicans who like voting for Republicans weren't as turned off by whoever the candidate was going to be, then what were you going to do, Chuck? Like you're going to get rid of all your own voters to court the other party's voters, and then when they go back home, you're going to be left with nothing, of course. And it didn't even work out in as rosy a way as he laid out, which would have in the long term been terrible. They ended up losing to Trump anyway and ejecting Democrats from the party at the same time.
I think it's important to point out that since he said that probably disqualifying for leadership thing, like how wrong can one person be?
Yeah,
I
8
think
full
he's won,
years ago.
Yeah, I think he's won 2 elections since then. And that is kind of damning about the way politics functions in this country. There are so many people that are completely disengaged. Like, the mandate that Trump keeps talking about not existing that I mentioned earlier. It's less than a third of registered voters voted for him. the winning party was no one voted. Like there are so many people just checked out. And in Senate elections, like the off year, every 6 year elections, the turnout is just atrocious because the Democratic Party and the Republican Party too, but they just don't care to reach out to people. They care to reach out to a certain group of people who are reliable voters. And this is where the Democratic Party, I think, automatically could just do better than the Republican Party. Like the Stacey Abrams thing. If they really did start doing things that the Democratic Party used to do and message on those things, that's the two. They got to do both of them. They got to message and actually do things for the vast majority of people. I think they'd win majorities again pretty easily. There's a lot of obstacles now, like the media component of it. Like talking about specifically Iglesias, I remember using some of his podcast stuff on the main show, like pulling out quotes from him. There's no way I would do that now. He has gone to a point where he is not a reliable source of information. And not that long ago, he was a pretty decent reporter. So there are some structures in place that are pushing us to this fascist dictatorship that we're barreling down or looking down the barrel of. But the message and what Democrats have traditionally wanted, what Bernie is hearkening back to, is always popular. It's always going to be popular because people want their lives to improve. And the Republicans are selling, well, we have someone to blame for it. We have plenty of people to blame for it. We'll maybe say that we're going to fix it, but not really. What they have is anger and blame. What the Democrats actually have is fundamentally making people's lives better. They should talk about Social Security and how well Social Security works. It's just right there. And I think there's a lot of people that are getting angry that the Republican Party is finally starting to do the things that they've been wanting to do for a long time. And that is make people's lives worse. So if your message is, I want to make people's lives better, and your policy is, I want to make your life better, that's just, we will win. Chuck Schumer could say that and it wouldn't sound so ridiculous because his policy prescriptions don't match anything that would say that he actually wants people's lives to be better. But the Democratic Party, it's right there. It's just right there for them. The bar is so low. If they could just step over it.
And this is a real battle within the party. This is probably going to get nasty. I was talking to some family members recently, and they get really anxious when Democrats argue and fight with each other. But like, this is part of the process. It's not going to be all smooth sailing and clean and nice and friendly. Like, this is what's going to happen. And it is a real battle. I just want to bring up quickly Alyssa Slotkin, who recently won a Senate seat and has been in the House for a while. She was on some cable news show and she was asked about Bernie and AOC's tour. And instead of saying something positive, like, wow, it seems like people are really interested or anything even remotely like that, her comment was unbelievably bitter and resentful. She said, what have they done? Her quote was, I can't do what she does, meaning AOC, because we live in a purple state and I'm a pragmatist. Everyone you mentioned has a lot of words, but what have they actually done to change the situation with Trump? This is a freshman senator who one of her first votes as a senator was for a Trump nominee. What have you done? What have you done to stop Donald Trump? Please tell me.
Well, she worked in the CIA. She probably can't say what she did. So.
Right, exactly, yeah. This is the battle. And, I'm picking on Alyssa Slotkin because she said this shit, but like, she's not alone, right? Like, there is a part of the Democratic Party that will be really resentful and angry about this shift. So it is going to get ugly, and it should be expected.
So on that note of this fight, the Jacobin article that's talking about David Brooks and all these others sort of concludes with this idea. It says, even if we might be inclined to welcome a tepid, mealy-mouthed mea culpa from Brooks and company, who can trust them and who wants their advice now? To which I say, having hope or faith in these moderates is not the point. It's not the point that anyone should listen to Brooks and company. It's that their shift is indicative of the bursting of the dam that has been built over decades to hold the Bernie style forces of progressive economic populism at bay. And this is similar to immediately after Biden's debate with Trump. As soon as I saw elite media worrying about Biden and indicating that he should probably step down, I was quite confident that he would. Not because those individual people are geniuses or anything, but they're so indicative of mainstream thought. And David Brooks has been swimming in that mainstream for decades. So if he comes out and says, maybe Bernie was right, that like gives permission to lots and lots of people to start saying and thinking similar things. It gives permission to people like Chris Murphy to start praising Bernie and saying like, hey, we were wrong. We thought he was bad, but it turns out he's good. All these things that are obvious to us outside the mainstream center-ish Democratic Party, these things being said means that the frame of the debate has shifted in our direction. And so there's still going to be a debate, and there's still going to be people who are a little bitter, and there's still going to be people who push back. But like the tide is turning. And just as I had confidence, like, I don't know how long it's going to take. It might be weeks, and it might be messy and bad in the meantime. But I was like, I'm pretty sure Biden's going to drop out. And I'm feeling that same tide. It really seems like Democrats are going to decide to do something different, because how could they possibly decide to keep going in this terrible direction?
Well, I think the response and the energy is giving way, but like, got to acknowledge the system in which there's so much money in politics that, of course, these conservative Democrats are not going to want to go the way of populism. It's not going to benefit them for the big donors and things like that. But the fact that it's happening in conversations shows the power that people have to sway, but also the need for consistent pressure, because at any point they're going to want to hide and do something half-hearted or change the messaging just slightly so that they can still appeal to donors. I like the direction and the pressure that's being applied. I like that it's being picked up from people who you typically wouldn't say align with Bernie. The only fear is that if it's not applied for, like, democracy is something you have to practice over and over again. I think we all know that. We learn it, we preach it, but you're going to see it play out here because there is a system in place that works against this populist message.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's not just the upswell from inside the party or, changing dynamics. We also have examples from outside our own country. So we're turning to, as promised last week after I accidentally made Erin sad with our lineup of articles, I promised that we could talk about Mexico, because Mexico shows how social democratic politics can win and be popular. This is from Current Affairs magazine, describing the recently elected new president, Sheinbaum, who won in a landslide by 30 points after their predecessor, Lopez Obrador, AMLO, was in office for 6 years and had like a transformational or debatably transformational time in office, depending on who you ask. But what is not in question is that he was very popular, and his sort of handpicked protege to take his place is even more popular. So from this article, they quote a couple other media sources. They quote Jacobin and they quote Novara Media, listing all the things that were done in Mexico in the last few years. So it says, Morena, that's their party, Morena in government passed a raft of worker-friendly legislation over its first term. This included increased employer contributions to the Afore system of individual retirement accounts, union reform providing for secret ballot elections, and the mandatory renegotiating of contracts, an outsourcing law prohibiting companies from contracting out their core functions, and increasing the formula paid in profit-sharing disability benefits and doubling of vacation days and the minimum wage. That was what Jacobin had to say. Novara Media chimed in saying, quote, Since coming to power in 2018, the party has extended pensions, raised the minimum wage, increased student grants, launched public works, reformed labor laws, and passed constitutional amendments to recognize indigenous and Afro-Mexican communities. Between 2018 and 2022, about 6 million people moved out of official poverty, and the effective renationalization of the oil and electricity sectors were the recuperation of energy sovereignty. So the article, I sort of mentioned, the article highlights that there is debate among the left about exactly how transformative the AMLO policies have been. But with the bar in the US so unbelievably low, this is the line that I really resonate with. It says, as a US leftist, I find it difficult not to look at the recent history of Mexican politics and feel simultaneously inspired by the country's example and depressed by our own comparative failure. The new president has an 85% approval rating, and it has some to do with being a little confrontational with Trump, but of course it has so much to do with the actual policies that have been delivered by her party that she is continuing to promise to build on. Democrats, just take the lesson. Just take it.
I think Claudia Scheinbaum, it's important, like it brought up in the article. She's a Jewish woman in a very machismo culture, Catholic dominant religion, and she has 85% popularity. And maybe there are like leftist critiques about what they have actually done, what they haven't done. Perception is a huge part of this. Like the perception that they're trying to work for working class people, whether it is even close to what the reality is important. And it does seem like that they are trying to work for working class people. And I don't know why the Democratic Party has forgotten this, but they had to change the rules because FDR was so popular. FDR was going to get reelected until FDR died. That's what that kind of working for the poor and working class, also the poor, bring that up. Like the poor doesn't get discussed here. Like we talk about middle class all the time, to the point that I would guarantee that the average person that is worth $1 million thinks that they're middle class in America. That term has so little meaning. We talk about it so much that we're talking about everyone and talking about no one. But we could talk about people who don't have things and helping get them things, get those people motivated. The vast majority of people that don't vote also don't have any hope for anything being done for them. I think there's a direct connection to the two. So if the Democratic Party, again, it's the only one of the two that actually could do this, starts working for poor people, people who don't have a lot of things, those poor people would come out and vote for them and name their kids whoever the president is. It's just like it would carry on for a long time. The reason why the Democratic Party has lost popularity is because it's lost its way and started doing Republican things. It tried to be Republican light. That didn't work. Here we are. Do things for people and they will come out and vote for you.
So the thought that came to mind was thinking about how white people fear Black people gaining power because if roles were reversed, they fear Black people would do onto them as they have done to Black people. That's how I think about rich people. Because like what you
Absolutely.
just read in Mexico, it's like, yeah, that is not my leftist dream, but that like sounds a hell of a lot better than what we have going on in the US. Like I don't think that working class people are asking for these radical shifts. They're asking for, are you ready for it? Common sense reform.
Call back. Wait.
Oh, common sense ain't so common when it's used to keep us down.
There we go.
Right, because what we're talking about labor protections. I mean, like that is half of what was listed in reference to Mexico as they looked at some labor protections. That is such a low bar, and like I'm not taking anything away from Mexico because they're on to great things, right? Who are we to cast any stones in that direction currently?
Right.
But I think, the oligarchy that we currently have, they fear what working class people would want. And what we want is to be treated with dignity, to be able to afford the things to take care of our families, to maybe go on a vacation every once in a while. Most people aren't asking for the wealth distribution that I would ask for,
Right.
right? And I think that's what really hurts, right? Is like, it's not that much. Like, there's so much to go around that
Yep.
we're just asking for a little bit more.
Yeah.
And it's being treated as if, people
Ask for
don't
the
want to
moon.
do anything anymore, right? Like, you're not willing to work hard, as if we don't all do that every single day, as if we're not the hardest working class.
And that's part of the perception thing too, is that the perception of the rich seems to be that we want to send them all to the moon or whatever, which,
I mean, we
Yeah,
do keep
yeah,
saying that we
yeah.
should eat the rich.
Right. And that is, I mean, that's like a very, like, that goes around as a message. But for the most part, I think in reality, people would be totally okay with Jeff Bezos having a yacht. We are not okay with him having a yacht for his yacht. We are not okay with Elon Musk losing $140 billion over the last month and still being the richest person in the world. We're not okay with that. The way we're talking about it, we're talking about those super mega rich people that we all know should have way less. But the average wealthy person isn't going to be affected by the things that we actually want. Those people, absolutely. And also, fuck those people. The most people that are really actually rich and not in the cartoonishly wealthy way, their lives wouldn't change at all. Maybe Elon's life would change. Maybe Jeff Bezos' life would change, but probably not really. It's just perception that we want to take everything from them. No, we don't want to take everything from you. Rich people existed in this country when the top marginal tax rate was 90%, because there were people that had that much wealth that they were rich and still paying that tax rate and still were rich. In a country that has better wealth distribution, there are still going to be rich people. And I think the people that say eat the rich, like I have said in the past, also need to acknowledge that rich people are going to exist and there is not going to be perfect parity. And I don't think anybody actually wants that. I think what we're trying to do is raise the floor and lower the ceiling a little bit, but definitely raise the floor. That's the key part. Raise the floor.
Yeah.
People should not live on the streets. People should
Yeah.
not know where their next meal is coming from. But also, Elon shouldn't have as much as he has.
So we need to be more nuanced with our chants. Like, we don't want to have to eat the rich, but we will if you keep going in this direction and force our hand.
I think we need to get Chuck Schumer to help us workshop this and make it more, more catchy.
Oh, yeah. No,
That's
he's
fair.
good. Let's call him in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just think we like nuance on this show. And so I do want to be nuanced about Obrador and his popularity. I think that what I've been reading about Obrador over the last few years was that he is rather a Trumpian figure. And I mean that not in just his bravado and his, like he'll say anything kind of thing. I mean that in the sense that he did go after like election protection rules, and he did, say he was going to fight corruption, but actually may have deepened it in some cases. And like, yes, he did some development work and infrastructure work, but also did not care about the environment or the indigenous people who are in those lands. So there was a lot of contradictions there. And I just want to put that out there because I think that it is certainly fine to look at other countries and see where they have done things right and where we can learn things from them. There are lessons to be learned here. But it doesn't have to be with a strongman type person that we get things done. I just really want to drive that home because I think we're in a position right now in a time in history where we're looking around the world and we're like, geez, all these strongmen are coming to power. And it seems like people really like that. So maybe we need a strongman who can do things for the left. I would guard against that real hard because that has also not gone well in history, especially in places in South America. And tying in the message of strong democratic institutions and levers are just as important as making sure we give people an economic message that actually works for them, right? Because we need to understand collectively as a country that our democratic norms and institutions, the stronger they are, the better they are, the more power the people have. If you let those things go and you don't reinforce them and you don't make sure they're really strong, you end up in the position we are in now. So, like, it has to go hand in hand. Maybe that's not the sexy message, but it has to be woven in as part of our message from the left.
This has turned into a very long chant. Like, I don't know
I know.
how we're gonna say
We gotta
this at a
shorten it up,
protest.
you know.
Workshop.
Yep.
Now, before we get to our final article, which I promise is even more hopeful and inspiring and positive than we've had so far, a quick shout out to, I think, like an unlikely source of inspiration. It's nothing personal. He's just not a prominent political figure, not as prominent as some. But Senator Michael Bennet at a recent town hall meeting said something that really resonated with us. And so he, like all prominent people in politics, keeps being asked, what can we do to stop the Trump administration and what they're doing right now? And the unfortunate truth is not that much, really. But, that's not what people want to hear. And so he shared this metaphor to describe the situation we're in, probably inspired by all of the national forests in his home state of Colorado. He compared the current actions of Trump and the Republicans to a wildfire. And then he pointed out that you cannot fight a wildfire from behind. You can't chase it. It doesn't work. You have to get out in front of it and create fire breaks. Then, until that fire reaches the fire breaks, it's going to continue to burn. And so that's not what any of us want to be true. But the country put an authoritarian party fully in charge of both elected branches of government. It was a collective act of national arson. And now we are living with the consequences of that. And we have the inability to stop it, which is very frustrating. But the metaphor of the fire break, I think, gives us a bit of a framework to zoom out, catch our breath, get our bearings, and figure out, okay, so how and where do we build the fire breaks we need? And so this article is about Plan 2028, which also includes movement building between now and then. So don't worry, you don't have to wait until 2028. And I think this might be the map we need to navigate the next few years to help contain the wildfire. Not immediately, because it's not going to happen immediately. And it's better to just embrace that, take that in. We are not going to stop them right now, but we need to be using this time to plan to build those fire breaks. So from In These Times, how a Plan 2028 could bring labor and social movements together. It talks about, we actually mentioned this on the show sort of offhandedly recently, but it talks about how in fall 2023, United Auto Workers President Shawn Fain called for unions around the country to align their contracts to expire on May 1st, 2028. That's Labor Day for you Americans who don't know when Labor Day is. And the idea is to have a massive collective cross-industry opportunity to strike on Labor Day in 2028. And it's a long ways away because you have to plan these things far away. So continuing, it says, over the last year, Fain's call has spread. Some unions, base building organizations, and political organizations are talking about how they can use May 1st, 2028 as a compression point to bring together a broad coalition of groups fighting around shared, bold demands through shared cooperative campaigns and electoral work. But it clarifies, we cannot wait until 2028 to take action. Plan 2028 can begin with May Day 2025, which is very right around the corner. And it could look like a series of escalating actions over the next several years, including engagement in the 2026 elections in coordinated fights against the implementation of Project 2025. It goes on, but how's is everyone feeling inspired? Excited?
Well, Jay told me about that, what Bennett said about the forest fire, and I thought that was so perfect for what's happening now. I think a lot of people aren't willing to acknowledge that there's just not things that we have in our control. And a forest fire, a wildfire, there are limited things you can do in the moment. You got to get out of the way, you got to move, and then you have to plan on how you're going to stop it. And I think now that the wildfires are raging, we are in the stage where people are saying, this is how we stop it. This is the plans we're going to have to set up. And also good to acknowledge, and I think goes with this metaphor, it's like the Republican Party spent the last 50 years pouring gasoline all over the forest bed. Like, they have planned to start this fire for a long time. So now that people are seeing it, now that people are seeing the damage, I think it's good to acknowledge what's happening. It's good to acknowledge that you have limited control, but the things you can control, it's time. It's time to start doing what you can.
Yeah, and it's not like we didn't know what they were going to do. I think that's another element of this, you know. They had this whole thing laid out in a book called Project 2025. And so there might have been some lessons we could take, and maybe you certainly couldn't fight everything, but there might have been some we could have been ready for.
Sure.
But in terms of, you know, looking forward and not back, yeah, let's see what we can do to create Firebreaks. I mean, I thought in this article, they talk about Minnesota, which was a great example of something that's already been done, but just on the state level, saying 10 unions and base building organizations have been working together every past 10 to 15 years to align union contracts and community demands, as well as conduct a shared power analysis, identify common targets, build trust, develop leaders, and take coordinated action. Unions align their contracts to expire around March 2024, and working with one another and local social movement organizations, the key tie-in here, they developed coordinated contract and legislative campaigns around 4 shared themes: stable housing, good schools, dignified work, and a livable planet. That's how you do it. That I didn't know about that. And I was very impressed by that.
And not one time did they say eat the rich.
That's right.
Yeah.
And, you know, Amanda, you're definitely not wrong for pointing out that we partially knew what they were going to do because of Project 2025. But I've been hearing Republicans say that they want to shrink government to the size that it can be drowned in a bathtub
yeah.
for 20 years.
Yes, this is not new.
Grover Norquist, yeah.
This is
Right.
always what
Right.
they were going to do if given enough power, and particularly if given a president who doesn't give a shit about law and is willing to
Yep.
steamroll the process in any way. Like, I think they use the metaphor of drowning in a bathtub because that seemed feasible. If they could have come up with the metaphor of lighting the entire government on fire and watching it burn while they dance, if they thought that wouldn't be off-putting, they would have said that 20 years
Yeah.
ago.
Absolutely.
Same deal.
It's just that they had plausible deniability before they released Project 2025, and then they had the playbook as part of the campaign, no matter how much they denied it.
I don't know why that didn't catch on and become like the disgusting metaphor that was, because you know who drowns in bathtubs? Babies drown in
Oh,
bathtubs.
God.
That is the metaphor that they're using. Those are the only people that drown in bathtubs, or elderly people who can't get up. It's so heinous, but that's what they were saying this whole time. They were saying, we don't care about people. We want people to suffer.
Yeah. Now I think it's worse because it's
Oh.
not, you know, because babies and the elderly drown in bathtubs accidentally.
Mhm.
They wanted to hold it under the water. They wanted
Yeah,
to
murder.
wrap their
They
fingers
wanted to
around
murder
the
it.
neck of government while holding it down in the bathtub.
I agree with you. It was worse.
Wow, we went to a dark
No,
place there for such a hopeful show.
They did.
They did, you're right.
did. We
It's
don't.
not-
Yeah.
That's right. You're right.
So
Yeah,
then,
you're
like, Deon just like created this little internal. I was like, wait, why was that an okay thing to say?
Exactly.
I was like, oh, right. If you spend forever scapegoating the government as, you know,
Yeah.
the actual problem instead of the moneyed interests that have completely corrupted the system, like, of course, then it would be acceptable to quote drown the baby. I don't know what metaphor we're now going with, and I feel real weird about it. So,
It's gotten messy.
I mean, if you're going to try to answer the question, how is that acceptable? Like, it was the 80s.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's right.
also true.
For all you Bluey fans out there, it was the 80s. Things were different.
So Erin just laid a perfect introduction to my rant that I didn't get to in the last segment, but is actually more relevant right now. that message about how government is a failure and so we don't need it and we should shrink it down to nothing and it's only causing you problems, and the scariest words are I'm here from the government and I'm here to help, or whatever Reagan said. All of that was reflected in this very specific throwaway line from the article we read about Mexico and trying to be inspired by their movement. There was a throwaway line about how Biden tried really hard to expand internet access to rural communities, and it was called BEAD, acronym. They were giving billions of dollars to all the states to expand their internet infrastructure and make sure that rural communities had the internet in 2024, right? Something that seems kind of bonkers. And he compared it to FDR's electrification program of the country. And, sort of rightfully so to some degree. So the throwaway line was that the whole program just got bogged down in bureaucracy and went away. That was the throwaway line. And there was a link to that line. And so I went to it, and it's to a Politico article whose headline I don't have in front of me right now, but basically said the same thing, that, the internet infrastructure effort was bogged down in bureaucracy and basically failed. None of that is true. And I was pretty stunned to find out that not only is it not true, but in the article from Politico, they explain in detail why that is not true. And so here's the deal. There was a requirement in the bill that providers needed to offer an affordable, low-cost service option. Obviously, right? We're not just going to give everyone a bunch of money and then the internet companies get to charge exorbitant rates. We want it to be accessible. That was the whole point. I think that's like one of the words in the acronym was accessible, right? So some states, and particularly Virginia is what everyone's been talking about, got big pushback from the internet providers on that requirement. And I guess the requirement was like a little bit vague. And so they had a lot of room to like fight it and kind of make it, oh, well, we can't possibly afford that. Some of these people live, far off a main road, and that's going to cost a lot of money. We can't possibly give affordable internet to those people, even though they're getting billions of dollars from the government to expand the infrastructure. So Virginia, because they like to see themselves as this tech-based state where Amazon has its second headquarters now, and there's apparently a ton of server farms there, which I did not know before now. They are extremely catering to these telecom companies. And so after Virginia had submitted their application, the telecom companies were like, whoa, we can't offer like super low cost service. And so the government of Virginia decided to take up that request and fight the federal government over it. And then it got bogged down in not bureaucracy, in a fight over what is right and whether or not people who don't have high incomes should be able to afford the internet. And that is such a core story about why we are always looking at the wrong target. Because everyone, as Erin said, has been saying the government is bad. It doesn't do anything for you. Look how messy it is. Look how long things take. It took that long because telecom companies, corporations who have their own interests, and that interest is profit, they gummed up the works. They got in there and made it messy and made everything drag out longer and longer and longer. Now, Republicans in Virginia did the exact same thing that Erin just said. They were actually excited initially about saying, like, we're going to bring internet to our rural communities. That's a great thing that we can, stand on and say. And then when it started getting bogged down, what's the first thing they started saying? Federal government for you. What do you expect? Actually, no. Turns out that's not the problem. All these other states got their funding and moved ahead with their project. Why did Virginia have to wait so long for their project? Because of corporate interests and because of being cozy with corporate interests. That is the problem in America. And Democrats need to start telling people where to look. They are looking in the wrong place. And this also, this is a commentary on media, but it's also a commentary on Democrats not taking the opportunity to shine a light on what is actually freaking happening. So, You give $1 billion to internet providers to do the right thing and have them push back to maximize their profits and not do the right thing. And that leaves us nowhere. So maybe what we can learn from Mexico is like nationalization.
Isn't that what happens though? Like Democrats aren't screaming it loud and clear, so the media also can be lazy in reporting and not articulate it in the way that it needs to be.
So, Amanda, are you saying that maybe like a militant politicized labor movement working with social movement organizations need to take leadership in defending and expanding democracy, just as they have done in other countries, end quote? Because that's how
That is
our
what I'm saying.
Okay. I was just checking.
Yes.
That is how this article ends. There was a clip in the show on Best of Left recently about how what it is to be a progressive is to be right, but too soon, and to lose a lot because you're waiting for everyone to catch up with you. And like all this stuff seems really obvious to us, but what's hopeful and inspirational is people are starting to catch up. And it's a long time coming. And the fact that the labor movement is taking concrete action that can go alongside with the cultural shift that's happening in politics, it's shifting because it has to shift because, as we mentioned at the top, we're in an absolute calamity. And for anyone to try to keep going in the same direction would be lunacy. But UAWs calling for strikes. Going back to the article, it says, Plan 2028 should include an electoral strategy. We must make demands on not just employers, but also the state at the local, state, and federal levels. Plan 2028 activities could help build independent political organizations and support progressive midterm candidates based around those demands. Like, again, give progressives who are going to be flooding into the political system right now out of absolute frustration, give them something to run on. So these sort of concrete plans happening outside but adjacent to the political system, combined with the shift in social sentiment towards progressive ideas and the what is absolutely going to be an influx of progressives running for office, the future doesn't look as hopeless as people who just pay attention to what Trump and Elon are destroying today might think.
So I forgot to mention this, and it was part of my point when we were talking about Bernie and how the question was, like, are you running for president? That mindset reminded me of it's going to take one person. Like, we just need a hero. We're waiting for that person to come into office and rescue us. And like, in what Bernie is doing, I think if you have that mindset, you might look at him and be like, he's the answer. Like, he absolutely should run for president because it's that guy. But that's also missing the messaging of what he is doing, which is going state by state, city by city, town by town, like getting individuals involved and not asking less of them, but asking for more participation,
which we
for
have
more
talked about
awareness. Like, it is an inspiring call to action if you see it for what it is, which is, I follow a poet and they have this line where they're talking about the love of your life, right? And what if you're the love that you've been waiting for? So like, I think of this as, what if all of us are the hero that we've been waiting for? It's just going to take a lot of individuals coming together in order to create this better future.
Bernie's tagline for that tour is "Not me, us."
Yeah. Which is
That's
beautiful.
it.
I mean, oof, that hit you right in the heartstrings.
But is he running?
Oh, Deon.
Come on, Matt Iglesias, calm down.
So are we on the road to solving it?
Oh, I think this whole... I was literally going to say that I think Jay specifically curated these articles so that we're paying tribute to our namesake, that we're coming out of this fully able to be like, solved it.
That's what we do. That is what we do here. All right. If you have any, chime in and let us know how you're going to get involved in this upsurge, right? This article talks about how you can't predict an upsurge in the labor movement, but you can prepare for it. And I would argue that this is something that is more pre-planned than anything I've heard happening on the left in decades. And so join the movement while the wave is rising, because you joining it is what's going to help it rise. This is not like every year we have a Labor Day and no one really pays attention to it. This is, we are building power for this year and next year and the year after and the year after and going forward. That's what this is aiming to do. And it only works when people get involved. So get involved.
Yeah.
You can leave us a message at 202-999-3991, voicemail or text. You can email us to j@bestofleft.com. You can reach us on Signal at bestofleft.01. Thanks for listening. Remember that all of this is really happening, so be decent, act like what you do and say matters, and do what matters most.
I think it's a good sign of how the episode went when I'm like, okay, what are we doing, y'all? Like, I am ready.
Let's go.
Answering the call. Let's get it.
I'm excited to hear what song the AI comes up with for this.
What?
Oh,
Wait,
oh
hang
no.
on. You said you were excited to hear the song
Yeah.
of AI?
I know.
Oh, man.
I know. I know.
Full convert.
In a time of wildfires, set by vengeful hands, the old guard chants we will win while the flames expand. The smoke fills the sky, and the air is hard to breathe. We're trapped in the chaos with no way to leave. Oh, the fire's raging, tearing through the land, but we'll build fire breaks together, hand in hand. It's not me, it's us. We're the ones we've been waiting for. United we'll rise, stronger than ever before. They say drown the government in the bathtub, while corporations gum up all the works. The poor and working people need a voice, but they keep dividing us with false choice. They've doused the forest, set it to burn, fiddling with joy while ignoring concern. But we'll hold the line, refuse to fall. Our strength and spirit will outshine it all. Through union strength and civic might, we'll break their chains and claim our right. It's not about one, it's about us all. Together we rise, we'll answer the call. Oh, the fire's raging, tearing through the land, but we'll build fire breaks together, hand in hand. It's not me, it's us. We're the ones we've been waiting for. United we'll rise, stronger than ever before. Plan 2028, it's a vision, it's a call. Align the unions, the people, one movement for us all. We'll come together in strength, with hope to guide the way.